Welcome to Sozo Talk Radio.
Sozo Talk Radio.
All right, well, welcome to Sozo Talk Radio. I have the privilege tonight of having a conversation with Eden Jersak. Welcome, Eden.
Thanks for having me, Catherine.
Oh, thanks so much for taking the time to chat with me today. This was something I mentioned to my husband on a whim, and then he conspired to make it happen for me. So I'm very excited for our conversation tonight.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel.
I know he enjoyed talking with your husband, Brad. He has a couple interviews uploaded on Sozo Talk Radio. So if you enjoy our conversation, you might want to check out our husband's conversation, also on the radio show about some of the books that he's written. So that would also be good material. But I wanted to talk tonight about Eden's book. I have it with me here, Rivers from Eden. So this is a book that I just really love. I've bought several copies because I keep giving away my copy to friends and then have to replace it. I just find like it's a really great tool for talking with people about prayer and how to kind of revamp your prayer life of it starting to feel very like one-sided, how to take it from that one-sidedness to a conversation with a living being who wants to interact with you. So I really appreciate just the tool that it is in that case. Can you tell me, first of all, I have questions about the title, Rivers from Eden. So can you tell me about how you arrived at that and what that means to you?
Well, interestingly enough, my name wasn't Eden when we came to that book title.
Wow.
And Brad had written Can You Hear Me and Children, Can You Hear Me? And was kind of feeling like there needed to be another book coming up. And he was away on a trip. And when he came back, he goes, I've totally figured out what our next book is going to be. And I'm like, okay, what is it? And he said, well, first of all, you're going to write it. And I'm like, oh yeah, I just couldn't possibly picture this, right? So he told me the concept that he and someone else had kind of talked through about having good questions to ask God that makes a prayer more of a dialogue rather than just a to-do list for God, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I think what I would do is I would just like introduce the question and the value of it, and then you can just do your listening time and your journaling on that question. So this was probably in October when he kind of gave the idea out to me, and then he started. We started kind of coming up with some of the questions, and then once we had just a few questions down, he goes, okay, I want you to start journaling. And I'm not going to let you see all the questions ahead of time. I'm just going to like lay it out for you the day before or the evening before or even the morning of. And then you go in, do your listening and journal it out. So there's 40 questions in the book, kind of questions to ask God in open dialogue. And Brad had said, you know, wouldn't it be cool if we could get this done in 40 days? I'm like, yeah, not likely. It was over Christmas, right? And, but every day or every evening, he would give me the next question and I would read kind of what his value statement on the question was. And then I would get up at like 5 a.m. in the morning before our kids would get up. They were still little. And I would go downstairs to the computer and I would just start listening and writing out what I was hearing. And that's what came of it. 37 days later, the book was done. And even though my name wasn't Eden at the time, not officially, I was in a process towards going there. And so there's a passage from Genesis, and I'm not exactly sure where that is or what the address is, but it says there were 4 rivers that flowed from Eden. And that was the idea behind Rivers from Eden, was that from Eden, the garden, there is plenty that flows. And the fact that the garden was the place where where God walked and talked with Adam and Eve, and it was an actual beautiful dialogue between them, was kind of where we wanted to go back to.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I saw it in the beginning. Genesis 2:10, a river flowed from Eden, watering the garden.
Yeah.
Just right in the preface to the book.
I should have checked that out.
No, I'm terrible at remembering references too. Like I have the verses, but not the numbers. I think that's so beautiful. It reminds me of the hymn in the garden, thing. And as Daniel and I get to travel, and lead worship in a lot of different places, and their culture of worship or their services are a little bit different, we get to play a lot of hymns, and that's one of my favorite ones to bring, and everybody loves it. And sometimes I'm flabbergasted by that, because it has such a great message, and I'm like, are you guys hearing this? Do you, even in the most conservative circles, I guess, like they still love that hymn in the garden, and he walks with me and he talks with me, and
he tells me I am his own. Right?
Yeah.
I think the thing that hymn really taps into is our longing for a relationship with God that is just like that, right? And a lot of us have gone so far from that place, and our prayer times or whatever is just us bossing God around and telling him, this is what you should do. And could you make the weather just right? As if that's really like, we're going to waste our time talking to God about the weather? Come on.
Yeah, I think I might be guilty of that. Yeah, that's so good. Exactly. Our prayers are not meant to be bossing him around, but a conversation with a friend. If you think about it, sometimes, like, how would you speak to your friend if you were meeting them for coffee or having a conversation? Would you take the whole time to talk just yourself, or would you allow them space to respond?
Exactly.
I think there was another analogy. It might even be like from Brad's book, the Can You Hear Me Now? I love that one too. But to go beyond prayer, of thinking about calling God and leaving him a message on the answering machine. Like, here's my message, and then maybe he'll check it and get back to you when he has time, versus like, okay, am I picking it up, and are we having a live conversation with a living person? That's huge.
Absolutely. We spend a lot of we think prayer is us talking, and I think what we were learning 15 years ago when we wrote that book was that we need to leave a lot more space for God to respond to our questions. And it's in the pregnant pause of waiting for his reply that suddenly all manner of things come our way, and understanding dawns as to what's important to God. It's not just questions about, why are things like this, but it's, why do you feel like this? Or how do you feel, period, right? And asking God that.
Again, I guess I'm just struck by how we can view God as, like his personhood, that he is a living, that he has something to say, like you said. There's so many good questions in the book. A few of them: what gift can I offer others today? What gift can I offer you today? Do you have a gift for me today? So you're kind of taking all of those same questions and asking it in a personal sense, like from you to God, but then also taking it out to, okay, well, how do I bring this out of even just the intimate time I'm having with God? And how do I bring that out into the world?
Right. So kind of taking something that's just a personal thing and finding a way to activate what you're experiencing. And I think that's important. Or even like, you know, we've been in circles where the whole prophetic side of things is really strong. And it's beautiful. And we totally love that. But sometimes we're waiting for this massive download of some sort of intergalactic, like amazing message. When, what if we just ask something as simple as, God, what gift do you have for Catherine today? What would you like to deposit in her heart before she goes to bed? Or where will you meet her today and open her eyes to see where you'll be? And then now it's like, now it's a wonder, right? You're imagining all the things that could be. And I think it's just more alive in those moments, right? It's not such a clinical sort of prayer where, you know, we learned, what was it like ACTS or something like that? ACTS, right? And it was like, you had to cover all the bases. It was like, well, we're not playing baseball here. We're spending time with a being that loves us and knows us better than we know ourselves. So if we could really sit across the table from them and find out more about ourselves and more about them, then how would you act? Would you really care about whether it's sunny tomorrow then? Right. You know? Right. I'm bringing up the weather because we've had a couple of bad days. And I have friends who are going on a holiday, and the 3 days they're away, it's just pouring. And I'm like, oh God, like, isn't there something you could do? And I find myself falling back to that. And I was like, just not my problem, and probably not his really either.
I understand that. We're having a rash of a heat wave here in Wisconsin. So it's very hot, 80s and 90s, but the humidity is just jacked up. So the indexes are like in the hundreds something.
Wow.
So just very steamy. So I know that there are lots of people in Wisconsin that are probably praying for the humidity to break and for the heat to go down. Yeah, I personally have a harder time with the polar vortex, so the heat I kind of weather. So.
Oh, if only we were in charge of the weather.
See, right?
We'd have it all covered for ourselves anyways.
So true, so true.
Yeah.
Well, I love finding out about the fact that you wrote this book in the literal, you said 37 days.
Yeah.
So, you know, just asking those questions every day and being that kind of thing. Like, I love that because it's so, when you get the book and you buy it and you read it, you can see that these are just like real, like raw questions, and you're just real raw answers. Like, this was the thing I needed to hear that day. This was what God was saying to me in this moment. And it's a capsule in time of those things. And I think that's super great because it's really truly an example of how someone would use it. You would read a chapter every day, you ask the question, and then you wait to hear what God is going to say to you. So that I give it away as a devotional. Anytime anyone's asking, hey, got any good devotionals or what are you reading? I'm always like, here, try this. Because I think, you know, while Bible study and all of those other things, there's a lot of that out there. You know, there's a lot of places to kind of dig in, you know, of all of those kind of things. But I'm like, you know, a book on prayer that's just meant to activate, I guess, intimacy and relationship, like that just really, it just really excites me. And I'm like, that's really what I want to see happen for everybody.
Yeah.
So like, that's what I always recommend. I'm like, yes, try this because it'll be good. And I like how in the foreword too, you just talk about reading through this is meant to be a jumping off point. So you can try these questions, and if they resonate with you and God's speaking with you, that's super great. But they can also bring up other questions. We can have our own questions for God, and we can kind of use this as a jumping off point.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, like, really, we're going to limit it to 40 questions?
Right. Just do those 40 over and over until
yeah. Yeah. And, you won't get bored at all. But yeah, exactly. It is only a catalyst, a way of recognizing, you know what? And even what if it doesn't transform your relationship with God? What if it only transforms your relationship with your friends, for how you ask them questions and how you find out more about them? I know that it will change things about how you pray. I get that. But even on a way more basic human level, the skill of learning good questions that draw out dialogue and help you to discover who you're sitting across the table from is a really fantastic skill to hone and work at.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So would you tell us a little bit more about your name change story? My husband and I traveled out to Portland and got to spend time with you and your husband, Brad, at the Open Table Conference. And I got to attend Eden's breakout session, and just really loved what you had to share about like the process God took you through, and just thought it was beautiful. So I'd love to share it with our listeners.
Sure. So it was January of 2004. I had started, Brad and I were pastoring at our own church, but our youngest son had just gone into grade 1. And so he was, doing school during the day. And it provided me with space that I had not had in 10 years. So I started going to another church where I didn't have responsibilities. I wasn't in leadership. People didn't even know at all, like, who I was. No different from the other strangers who were there. And I took this one class, and I think it was called The Tapestry of God. And it was taught by an amazing teacher by the name of Bev Gordon. And I just loved being in that class. It was just lovely. So January 2004, she's been teaching, and at the end of the class, she had gone through one of Brad's preliminary Hearing God conferences, and she asked the class, what gift would God like to give you today? And I took a moment to listen, and I felt like he was saying, I want to call you by a new name. Or I'm going to call you by a new name. And I thought, it's kind of curious. Wonder what that means. And I really pretty much dropped the ball right away. But we were asked to share with someone beside us what we heard. And the person who was beside me said, oh, that's really awesome. I love that. What do you think he's going to call you? And I said, I've got no idea, none. So we left the class, and week after week, I would go back to this class, and this woman would see me. We were actually becoming friends, and she said, and she would keep asking, like, what's the name? What's the name? And like, she was way more into it than I was, right? And in March, Can You Hear Me came out. It was the first book Brad wrote, and we were doing a launch out in Saskatchewan. Not a great place to do a launch, but it was a launch nonetheless. And this woman, her name is Lori, came along on that trip with us. And while we're there, she said, I think I know what your name is going to be. Oh. And I said, oh, really? Are you, like, what is it? And she goes, oh, I don't think I should tell you, because I think God should tell you. And I'm like, oh, you got to be kidding me, right? So I think she couldn't hold it in long either. So on the flight home, it was just her and I, and she said, well, I think I know where it is, and I'm going to share it with you, and then you can, decide what you want to do. So she says, it's in Psalm 1 in the Message. So I read the whole thing. She's got a book there, a Bible there to read it through. And I'm just like, I don't see any names in there. And I'm like, I'm not doing river or tree. Like, I'm not doing that. And then she goes, like, look right here. It's like, you are like a tree planted in Eden. She goes, what about Eden? And I'm like, huh. I said, I don't know. Like, it was just so far out of my comfort zone. I had no grid for this whatsoever. And then she said, can I start calling you that?
Wow.
Yeah. And I don't think I said wow out loud, but inside I was. And I thought, well, what could it hurt? And so I said, sure. And so immediately her intention was to call me Eden. So when Brad got home, I told him what had happened. He goes, oh, that's kind of cool. Can I call you that? And I went, sure. And it was really hard for him. It was really hard. And it was always like very intentional and kind of, it felt harsh, like Eden, right? Because my name had been Edith. And so you get the first syllable, like you're free there, but it's remembering the second half of the name, right? But he really tried, and he was like, really like, oh, you should change it. And I'm like, oh, I'm so far away from actually wanting to change my name. So that was January to March. And then just this little process kept happening. I was doing a lot of journaling. I was doing tons of reading. I was journaling my dreams, and all this stuff was kind of collaborating together. And I was kind of going through a deconstruction, not of my faith, but I was just about to turn 40. It was like all of who am I? What am I doing? And God would show up in a big like caterpillar, one of those like earth mover kind of things, right? And he's in my heart's backyard, and I'm just looking at him, and it's rumbling, and it's right in front of me, and he kind of sticks his head out the cab and says, I'm about to do some work. You can jump in here and help me, or it will crush you.
Wow.
And it didn't feel like a threat. It was just like this is the reality of what you have already started. And so I jumped into the cab, and dream after dream, we would dig up holes to the point where there was nothing left of my yard that I could tell had been there before.
Wow.
We would find things that people had thrown over the fence and left behind that they had just discarded, and somehow I had collected that message or that information, and it had become part of me. Or we dug up things that I had kind of buried somewhere, and that I'd entirely forgotten about, but that really mattered to me. And there's all kinds of stuff. And so for months, I was dreaming stuff like that. I was writing out it in the day. And slowly, closer friends were hearing the name Eden, and they were calling me Eden. And then in September, one day, I'm journaling, and I'm having a conversation with God in my journaling time, and he calls me Eden. And I literally dropped my pen, and I just went, wow, this changes everything. And part of it, I think, in hindsight, was recognizing that I had taken in the name so deeply that I was identifying with it. And now God was, the original word was, I will call you by a new name. And so far it had only been other people calling me
Right.
by a new name. And now it was God calling me that. And I identified with it. And it didn't feel foreign.
Right. It wasn't like he just came to you and said this random name and you were
Yeah.
like, who is that?
Exactly. So that was a 9-month process, which didn't go unnoticed by me. You know, kids and pregnancy were not that far behind me.
Right.
And I just thought, oh, this has been birthing this whole time. So in December, I was turning 40. This was September. And I felt like this changes enough that I actually would change my name legally. The only challenge, or the biggest challenge, was telling my parents.
Yeah.
So, like, if you think of your kids and the time you spent picking out their names, I'm not sure my parents actually took a lot of time, but anyways, it is what they chose for me.
Right.
And I wasn't rejecting the name Edith at all. I had no problem with it whatsoever. I never bothered me.
Right.
But in seeing what God had been doing with me in that year, I was just like, I want to embrace that. I want to take this on. And this is way out of my comfort zone, but I kind of feel like, bring it on. And so it was October, so a few weeks later, and I had kind of thought, I need to tell my mom and dad because they can't just hear this via the grapevine, right? And they live right next door to us.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they did at the time. And so I was kind of preparing myself. I was at the kitchen table, and our son Stephen, who was like 12 at the time, comes up behind me and he just says, are you going to tell Grandma and Grandpa that you're changing your name today? And I'm like, yeah, actually, right after you guys go to school, I am walking over there and I am going to tell them. And he goes, I want to pray for you. Aww. And so he was standing behind me, just put his hands on my shoulder. And he didn't say a word, but I just felt this immense comfort. Like, you're not going alone, Mom. You know,
that's so beautiful.
Yeah. So the kids went off to school, and I crossed the yard over to my mom and dad's place and had a long conversation with them that had nothing to do with me changing my name. They kind of had their own topics they were wanting to cover. And then finally I said, I came over to tell you something, and it's really, really important to me. And I would really, really like your blessing on this, but my decision doesn't hinge on whether you can bless me or not. I am doing this. Now let me tell you what I'm doing. I said, God has been doing amazing things in my life in this last year, and I want to embrace what he's doing. And like in Scripture, where Abram and Sarai and Paul and Saul, getting all the names mixed up, their names were changed after an encounter with God. And part of their name stayed the same and part of it was changed. And it was kind of like, this is who I was, but now this is who I am. So I said, I am changing my name from Edith to Eden. And I said, you know what? You don't even have to call me that. You only know me as Edith, and that's fine. I can do that. It would bless me if you called me Eden, but it won't hurt me or harm me if you don't. And they blessed me as best they knew how. And I took it and ran with it. I was so thrilled to be able to do this. I also had to tell an entire congregation that I was changing my name.
Wow.
And they were amazing. They, like from day one, everyone tried to remember my new name, and no one gave me a hard time. They were just curious, excited for what was happening in me, and even would validate the process and see and tell me that they have seen what God was doing in me. And so it wasn't an easy thing to do. A lot of people had to kind of embrace it too, right?
Right.
If you can change your name, but if people won't call you that, did you really change your
Right.
name? Right?
Right.
It's interesting. I'll tell you one little story about our son, Justice, our middle guy. He was probably 9 at the time. And he, even though he calls me mom, of course,
Right.
he just was not cool with me changing my name to Eden. And so he had a little moment where he just told me how he felt, and it was pretty hot. And he finished his little tirade, and then Brad just looked at him and went, "Well, thanks for sharing, Justice. And I just want you to know that we've registered your grievance and I don't ever want you to give Mom a hard time again about this choice that she's made. I just want you to let it go." So he was like, "Well, I am never going to call you that." And I said, "Well, then it's really lucky that your name for me is Mom, and I'm not changing that name, right?" So probably about 3 nights later, we had been out for a meeting. We came home. The kids were all in bed and sleeping, and there was a handmade card on the table. And it said, "To Brad and Eden, the most amazing parents in the world." And inside was, "I love you, Justice," right? And it was like, he didn't say Mom and Dad. He said Brad and Eden.
Yeah.
And I think it was him just saying, "I get it. I'm with you. I support this," in his 9-year-old self, right?
I love that.
Yeah. So did I leave anything, any questions for you after all that? It seems like a bit of a ramble.
No, I love that. Thank you for sharing that story. I love, I guess, the metaphor to the garden, and then the fact that your name changed to Eden, and how it so parallels the scripture, how the names were so close but only slightly changed, Edith to Eden. Like, that's just so many cool details, I think, to your story that just really make it really cool.
When Brad first wrote "Can You Hear Me?", my name was still Edith.
Okay.
And so the first books, and there will be some out there, several thousand, that have Edith in there when he's talking about me. So it's funny because people who knew me, like for a period of time, would come up to me after I changed my name. They'd say, "You know what? I'm really embarrassed about this, but I thought your name was Edith, and I've been calling you Edith. Why didn't you correct me?" I'm like, "Well, because it was Edith." And it is Eden now. So you're totally in the clear. I would have corrected you if you had it wrong. So
that's funny.
Yeah.
I don't have, there was no real spiritual significance, but I also sort of changed my name when I was born. My name was Catherine. But then my family called me Kathy from like pretty much day one. And so I was that up until I believe it was 4th grade. We had somebody else move into this really tiny Christian school we were going to, and her name was also Catherine. And so I don't know, for some reason she felt like it was a new school, a new start. And so instead of being called Catherine, which is what her family normally called her, she wanted to be called CJ. I think it had a connection to her father who had passed away. That was his name for her. And so she wanted all of us to call her CJ. And it wasn't a big deal because we were just meeting her for the first time. And so we all went along with it. Okay, great, CJ. But that put that spark in my heart, like, wait a second, you can choose what you want to be called? Like, that was fascinating to me. And I was like, because I hate Kathy. That doesn't feel like me at all. Like, I just really don't like it. But I think Catherine is beautiful. So I was like, hey, can you guys start calling me that? And boy, it took a while. Like you said, for people that know you as one, to start calling you something else.
Yeah, it's really hard. Like, it's a big ask, right? To have a process happen in yourself outside of someone else's influence, and then to ask them as a result to change what you call them, but they do.
Yeah.
And it's lovely. And you're right, Catherine. I mean, it's such a strong, beautiful name. Do you know what it means?
I do. It means pure one.
Pure one?
Mm-hmm. Pure one.
That's cool.
Yeah, which it really resonated with me. Like I felt like it was prophetic over just a calling God had on my life. And so it really resonated, the meaning and the name. Plus I was named after an author. I love books. I kind of have a book addiction. So Catherine Marshall was the author. She was married to Peter Marshall. He's kind of a famous preacher, but she wrote a couple of nonfiction books and then also some really great fiction that, I really love. So my mom, we're a big family reader. So my mom was a big fan of hers. And so she liked the name Catherine, and that's how I got it.
And that's a great name to grow into, right? Like to know the meaning and then to strive to kind of fill that out in your life. It's really cool. Very cool.
The only other funny thing, since we're both moms and, have that in common, and you talk about choosing your name for your kids and all of those things. Eden was our choice for our girl's name if our third child would have been a girl. So he would have been Eden. I'm not sure about the middle name, but he turned out to be Elijah instead.
Yeah, awesome. Our at our little church that I go to now, there's a little girl there whose name is Eden, and she comes up to me many Sundays and she goes, Eden, and then she goes, oh, just feels so strange to call someone else Eden.
They're so honest, aren't they?
Yeah, it's lovely.
Okay, I do have a question for you. When you started your story, you talked about kind of you were in a process of deconstruction or God was doing some construction in the garden of your heart, which, by the way, I think is just a really beautiful metaphor. Like how God took you through that was so gentle and beautiful in that way. But you talked about doing some reading. So what kind of things were you reading that started that or aided in that process? Do you remember?
Wow, I don't. I honestly, it's a blank. Sorry.
That's all right.
You know what? I mean, a lot of it was just encouraging scripture, like don't give up here. You know, God is doing something in your life, and predominantly it was the dreaming and then the processing and the writing out of all of these things that were going on. And the books, I need to go back there.
I was just curious if you knew what they were, but that's fine if you don't. No problem. I think, just looking at my notes, one of the things that I can't remember if it was you or Brad that said it when at one of the talks at Open Table was they talked about being anchored with wings. And I remember writing that down because it just really struck me about how when we're in that process of that God is doing a new thing in our lives, or he's unearthing something, whether it's kind of work in our own heart or just changing how we think about things or revealing more of himself. Like how do we weather that process in a really healthy way? And I remember Brad just talking about how he watched you go through it as a really great example of that, just going through that process in a really healthy way. And he talked about being anchored with wings, that you had an anchor in your relationship with God, but that it didn't serve to hold you back, but yet it gave you like peace in the midst of whatever God was doing. So can you talk about that? Or
Sure. I think what he was referring to in that, using the anchored with wings, was that my faith wasn't in jeopardy. I wasn't like questioning who God was or what he was up to or whatever. I fully trusted that this process, even when it was painful, was unto something. And I think, like, even while all the digging was still happening, which it was just like, when is this going to stop? You know, like, because it just, things kept being unearthed. And even when I'm wondering, when is this going to stop? I'm still trusting that whatever is unearthed, whatever is moved, whatever is found, whatever is returned to wherever it needed to go, all needs to happen. And so my faith just wasn't shattered or like my relationship with God was probably better than ever because of the dialogues that I was having with him. And so I would, dig into it, there'd be a hole dug and there'd be something in it and we would pull it out. I wouldn't just assume what was there. I would like hold it up to him and say, what's this about? And let him explain to me, I think you left this behind. Like this was important to you. So for instance, one of the things we dug up was a cassette tape. And so then you know how old I am. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, so like, what's this about? And he's like, do you remember how much you loved just listening to music and how fun that was for you? And just, you'd sing along. I only sing in the car. That it's best for everyone that way. But, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember, like I had albums and cassette tapes and stuff, but you know what, kids come along and you set aside your own kind of things that feed you for the sake of feeding the kids. And so from that, several dominoes kind of fell. So one was that maybe 2 or 3 years prior to that, Brad and I and the kids had been on a road trip to see Grandma and Grandpa in Manitoba. 20 hours of driving without the stops. Yeah. Those kids were hardcore travelers. And we had stopped at our old Bible college and had seen some friends, and Brad and I just had to make a quick trip into the closest town. And as we were driving, we had a tape or a CD in the player, and we were listening to this, and it was a Sting song. And I said to Brad, it's really weird, but I feel like my name is on this song. And he's like, okay, we'll turn it back. Like, let's listen to it again. Like, let's hear. And like, nobody sings about Edith, right? Nobody, not even polkas. And so we listened to the whole thing, and I don't get it. Whatever. Like, maybe I just like the song, right? So fast forward now to digging up this CD or this cassette tape, and I'm like, oh yeah, wonder what that's about. I don't even think I really listened to music at that point right away. But a couple months later, when I heard God call me Eden, and I decided I'm actually changing my name, Brad goes, oh, remember the cassette that got pulled up? He goes, remember when we were driving in Saskatchewan and we had that CD on and you said, I think my name's on this. Let's listen to it now. We put it on. Listen, I get out the lyrics so I can actually see all of the words. Right. And right at the end of the song, he drops the name Eden. And I'm just bawling my eyes out. I'm just like, what? How is that possible that long ago? Like way beyond, or way before all of this happened. That was like 2000.
Wow.
And so it was just like when stuff like that kept happening, and I kept seeing how God was with me even before the big, shaking and moving and hole digging and all that stuff. When I could see that God has been with me on this trek all along, like, why would I need to be afraid now? Why would I start questioning who God is when all I have known is that God is Emmanuel, God with me. And so in a way that makes you feel fearless. You're just like, if he's here, I'm going. I'm good.
Wow.
I'm totally ready for whatever happens.
Wow, that's beautiful. That was the other thing I wanted to highlight, was just in the beginning how you talked about God was in the construction equipment, and he said, you can come in with me, but you said you didn't feel it when he invited you into that. Like he said, you could come with me or it will crush you. You didn't feel it as a threat. And I think so many times maybe we hear God's invitations as threats when we aren't anchored in that goodness, like understanding that he has only good things for us, that he has our best interest at heart.
I don't think he puts choices before us that are like good and bad. I think it's just like, do you want to be with me?
Yeah.
That's the choice. Like, do you want to be with me? It's like, yeah. Because if this is going down, and if all of these things are going to be unearthed, good, bad, and ugly, then there's no one else I can trust to enter into this process with.
As an aside, I can't help but think of my 3-year-old Elijah, who, if he was invited into construction equipment, it would be like his best day ever. Obsessed with all things with wheels and anything. If there's any road work to be happening, he's like, "Stop the car, Mom. I want to watch it." So that would probably be like the best thing ever. God inviting him, "Hey, come in this with me." Be like, "Yes."
It's awesome.
So funny. I guess the only other thing I would ask, and this is probably for the sake of anybody listening, if this conversation is sparking something in you and you're interested in going to that place with God, like they are interested in having more intimate conversations with him, in diving in and hearing his voice and having that back and forth dialogue and being with him, like you said, and having the relationship that you've seen Eden talk about and modeling for us in this conversation. Can you like really briefly just maybe set their hearts at ease? I know when I talk to people about this, there's sometimes a fear that comes up, and how do I know it's really God talking to me? Or how can I be sure that this is his answer? Or, those kind of things. So can you kind of address that?
I think if you believe in a good and loving God, and the things you're hearing from him when you're having a conversation are good and loving, you know that it's no one else. I know Brad covers this question in Can You Hear Me? And maybe we do a little bit in Rivers from Eden as well, just because it's a question that a lot of people ask. I think historically, and I mean like within the last 100 years or whatever, we have completely shut down God's voice. And there has been no room for a back and forth with him. It literally is a one-way conversation. And we just hope that, we think it happens, he must have heard me when the sun comes out, right? But the dialogue can be so generic, not generic, organic. Just like I'm leaving the garage and I think, I have so many things on my list, it's going to be really easy to forget that you're with me today, God. Surprise me somehow and show me your face. And I'm coming through a drive-through, and there's a woman whose neck is bent so horribly, I don't even know how that's possible. And she has a sign, and she goes, "I'm not homeless, but I don't have money, and I'm happy, and I don't need pity." but if you could spare something, would you do that? A beautiful sign. And she's sitting there, and I had seen her a few days before, and I looked and I went, oh, there you are, God. You're displaying yourself in someone who I could have easily overlooked or wanted to look the other way, right? And I think when our expectation is that I'll hear him, that I'll see him, that I'll sense him, we will. We will. And you will know in your heart, oh, this is the Lord with me. And I can see him, I can hear him, I can sense him here. I'll do one more quick story. This is quite recent. I had just been for an ultrasound on my thyroid. It's been acting up. And I knew by the way things had gone that there was something wrong. And I have already lost part of my thyroid. And so, I know the process of healing from that, and I leave a little shook up. And on my way home, I decide I just need a couple of things from the grocery store. I'm going to pick those up, and then I'm just going to go home and crawl in a cave because I'm not feeling great. So I go to this grocery store, way bigger than I should have gone to because I have to walk everywhere. And of course, you see all these things, and suddenly I realize I don't have a cart, and my arms are full of things that I picked up along the way. So now I'm a little bit traumatized from the ultrasound, but also hurting from all the things I'm carrying. I go to the self-checkout. I kind of start to drop down my things, and all of a sudden there's a hand on my back, just like rubbing my back. And this voice in my ear says, "Hi, beautiful. So nice to see you." And I turn around, and it's this woman I've only known for, at the time, maybe a couple months.
Wow.
And I finished doing my checkout, and she was just finishing hers. And we walked out to the car together, and I just said to her, I feel like I know where Jesus shops now. It's Superstore. I just said, you cannot imagine what your hand on my back today meant to me. It was Emmanuel. It was God with me. You are not alone. And we can just pretend that's a one-off and that it doesn't matter. It was just someone being nice, but don't discount that, or don't let that be anything less than a miracle and something beautiful that God has for you as a gift that day, So that doesn't really answer your question, but I think the more that you entertain the idea of having a conversation with God, the more and more secure you will feel in the voice that you hear, because when we ask for bread, he does not give us a stone.
Absolutely. It reminds me of in the breakout session that you did at Open Table, where you told the story about your name change and other things. You also had us do a meeting place and ask God a question ourselves right in the breakout session. And, what was God, saying to us? And, so I followed the directions and, the things. And for me, it's, it can be simple things, like things you already know, things that are like, of course this is true. Everyone would say this, but when God says it to your heart, suddenly it's just like an arrow that pierces you. And so, he told me, like, I have nothing but good for you. And it's like, well, of course I know that. Like, I believe in the goodness of God, and my intellectual mind can say, like, okay, I know God has good plans for those that love him. All the scriptures, you can go through that. But in that moment, when I was seeking to spend time with him and I'm asking him a specific question, what do you have for me? And then that's what he says to me. Like, instantly I just start bawling, because I'm like, it means so much, because you're like, oh, you're saying, like, this is a real person saying, I have nothing but, like, right to your face. You're like, oh, and it pierces you. And so
it's potent.
Yes.
It's really potent. Yeah.
So I think when you have the courage to ask those questions and wait to hear that, like, that the spirit inside of you, like you said, you just, for me, I'm like a crier. If somebody has a prophetic word for me,
Yeah.
or if God is speaking to me, or something is really going on in the spirit and I'm feeling it, like I'm emotional and the tears come and I'm like, okay, that's something definitely to pay attention to. Like God is doing something in this scenario.
Yeah.
But it's a beautiful thing. I love your story about finding God in places. I tell that to my kids because sometimes we can get this idea that God we have to be always saying a certain thing or like preaching about him, or even that we have to use words, or that, if we say the right things or model this, something like that's spreading the gospel or whatever it is that we're doing. But Daniel plays at nursing homes on a daily basis, which I don't know if you know about that yet or not, but when he's close to home or for other special occasions, sometimes we'll all go together as a family. And so there was one instance where we all went to this nursing home together as a family, and Daniel will sing some songs and I'll sing some songs, and the girls have some songs that they sing. And
Nice.
Elijah, my 3-year-old, goes and stands in front of everybody and marches while we sing When the Saints Go Marching In. And the whole room just lights up because he's so cute, and everybody loves the marching 3-year-old, and he's just so proud to sit there and march for everybody. But during this one concert, I saw my daughter Emma just standing there, and she was done singing her songs and other things. She was just kind of standing up near the front where we were, and I saw her just make eye contact with one of the ladies who was sitting in a wheelchair off to the side. And I just saw her face lit up, and she just gave the sweetest smile. It's one of those things where you're just like, I just need a picture of that moment, because it was just like a Hallmark moment when you see your kid just like her smile lights up, and she just like, it was just perfect. You could just see this, like the heavenly light came down. You're like, yes, angel child right there. I think that the person that she was smiling at saw that. Like you could see the connection.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, the person who was sitting in the wheelchair, who had a family member sitting right next to her, like she lit up. She made eye contact with Emma, and you could just see there was a moment passing between the two of them. Whatever else was going on in the room was irrelevant, but there was something between the smile of that little girl and the smile of this woman in the wheelchair that was it was like a holy moment. And I just stood there and watched it, and I just like, this was amazing. I knew that God was doing something in that woman just by my daughter smiling at her. Like there was something going on there. It was just one of those moments where and then sure enough, we get out to the parking lot and we're driving away. And the family member, might have been a daughter, I'm not sure, who was sitting next to her through the whole concert, came running up to our car and said, "Oh, is your daughter in there? Is your daughter in there?" And, she was sitting in the back seat in her car seat. And I was like, yeah. She just said, "I just want you to know, like, how much that meant to my mom." Like she smiled at her, and she just saw her, and she just can't stop talking about like that. I just want to thank you for coming and doing it. And Emma didn't really do anything. She just stood there and smiled at her, but it meant so much. And I think everyone in that moment knew that. And it was just such a cool moment for me as a mom to look back at my kids and be like, that was Jesus today. Like that's how you were Jesus today. That's where he was in our interaction. It was as simple as just smiling at that lady, like having that moment to see her and to recognize her, and to just like, it was beautiful. And I think that's,
Absolutely.
I don't know, that can be sharing the gospel in the same way as reading a verse or, saying something outright.
Absolutely. And the very first personal name that was given to God was by Hagar when she was out in the desert. And it was the God who sees me. So in that moment, Emma is reminding that woman, I see you. And I'm just going to use Emma's eyes for a few minutes.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
And so if we can recognize that we can hear, see, feel God through other people, but also we might be the instrument that he uses to see, hear, voice, touch, whatever. Now, all of a sudden, there are wings involved, right? Because there is something very empowering about feeling like, oh, I'm part of this. I'm participating, and it's not by rote. It's just really like very organic, and it just happened. It's cool.
since we're on the subject, real briefly, I know, and we do have it too. I didn't bring a copy up to the interview, but Brad also wrote a children's book, Can You Hear Me Now?, which talks about hearing the voice of God for kids. And I think there's just something really cool about like that moment when your kids get it, when you know
Oh,
that
yeah.
they've heard from God, and they know that they've heard from God, and suddenly it's like, oh, this is real. Like, oh, he is. I do have this relationship, and it's not just something that adults talk about or it's modeled, but that kids do
Yeah,
too. Our church says all the time, like, there's no junior Holy Spirit. Like the Holy Spirit
exactly.
is alive and active in the kids just the same way that he is in us. Maybe even easier for them because they don't have some of the baggage.
Oh, they don't have all the filters that we have, right? They're just really some in our church when we were pastoring, we expected the kids to hear God just as clearly as the leaders were. And some of the stuff they came up with was so profound. And it's just like, give them a voice, because God is not afraid of using little kids' voices to get a message to us that we seem to be ignoring from leaders or anyone else, including God. So, yeah,
He can
it's
use that
amazing.
in all of us. It's a beautiful thing. Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much, Eden, for taking the time to have this conversation and sharing a little bit of your heart and your story. It was just really great to hear all these things, and I hope that it encourages all of our listeners and anyone who watches the interview or listens to the podcast to just to be, I want to say, like, be brave, like take the next step. So whether it's asking God a question and expecting an answer, or whether it's being intentional and in involving that in your prayer life more, or whatever the next step is for you, ask God about that, and don't be afraid to dive in, because he's got nothing but good for us. And it's it can be a beautiful journey, even in the hardness. There's beauty at the end.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Catherine. It was lovely seeing your face again. And hopefully our paths will cross again before too long.
Yes, that would be lovely. Thank you so much, Eden.
Yeah.
Blessings to you and your family, and the rest of your evening.
Thank you.